Okay, so the Academy Awards historically are not so hot on superhero movies, and it's not immediately clear why. The Academy isn't opposed to violence, they're not opposed to big dumb action movies. Even being based on a comic book isn't a guaranteed turnoff. The 1990 Dick Tracy film got 7 nominations and 3 wins. And they've shown favor to other comic book adaptations as well. But the moment it's a superhero thing, you're done. There have been more Best Picture winners about actors who aren't taken seriously because they used to be in superhero movies than actual superhero movies. And the reason why is a sort of chicken or the egg type deal. For example, imagine you're Kevin Feige, producer of Iron Man 2 and overall MCU kingpin. One of your minions comes to you and says, "Lord Feige, you've made another masterpiece, and yet those fools at the Academy won't give you the recognition you deserve." You look to your minion with disdain of course, but also with curiosity. So you grab some of the folks from accounting and they do a cost-benefit analysis. Turns out the amount of money you'd have to spend on an Oscar campaign to even be in the conversation for the above-the-line categories, this could be $10 million, and that's the most conservative estimate. And there's not many filmgoers out there who are firmly on the fence about Iron Man 2, but would gladly go see it if only it were nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay. So you're not going to recoup those costs. So you say screw it, you abandon the campaign, you have your subordinate executed, and you bring in a new one who doesn't make such foolish observations. So why is a campaign going to cost so much? Well, Iron Man 2 wasn't particularly well reviewed, and that's pretty bad for its Oscar chances, but it's not a death sentence. If you don't have the critics on your side, you absolutely need to be an Oscar movie. The Academy votes based on precedent, and if you're lucky, the right campaign can turn mediocre Oscar bait into successful Oscar gold. Typically what you want here is an emotional drama, often but not necessarily based on real events, that you can argue is important in some way. Usually these films have a lot of focus on the performances, and you'll need some big names in front of or behind the camera to sell this as something bigger than its Rotten Tomatoes score. And this is where Iron Man 2 strikes out. So years later, if they decide to push Iron Man 3 for the Oscars, the Academy thinks back and says, why would we vote for this when Iron Man 2 wasn't even nominated? And the vicious cycle repeats. But we're not talking about Kevin Feige or the billion-dollar billionaire superhero sequel Iron Man 2. We're talking about The Dark Knight. 2008's The Dark Knight was the billion-dollar billionaire superhero sequel to 2005's Batman Begins, itself a reboot of the Batman film franchise. Directed by Oscar nominee and dialogue mutilator Christopher Nolan, Batman Begins was perhaps most notable for establishing a trend of darker, grittier superhero films. But it didn't really achieve overwhelming critical acclaim or break the box office. It did get a single Oscar nomination, but there's a reason they don't call it the Batman Begins trilogy. But Warner Brothers realized they had Christian Bale on contract for 2 more of these things, and Batman always makes money, so whatever, let's do another. The Dark Knight featured the return of Batman as he faces off against a variety of villains amidst a turbulent period in Gotham City. Whatever, who cares? It's the Joker one. You know, the one everyone loves, it's that one. Highest grossing film of 2008, 94% on Rotten Tomatoes. Boom.
It's gone.
Halloween parties may never recover from the onslaught of frat bros desperately asking, "You wanna know how I got these scars?" And so the Oscar campaign began. But why would this one succeed where others failed? Well, they had a unique strategy. They campaigned it as beyond a superhero movie. The Dark Knight isn't like the other girls. It doesn't even have Batman in the title. It's not a superhero action flick. It's a gritty thriller featuring an ensemble of 2 current Oscar winners, 3 future Oscar winners, 1 future Oscar nominee, and 1 Stinker's Bad Movie Award nominee. And did I mention that the guy the entire campaign is centered around, the actor who gave a performance more memorable than Batman himself, is dead? And he's not gay in this movie, so the Academy can't ignore him. He won at the Golden Globes, the SAG Awards, the BAFTAs, and over 50 more award shows acknowledged by IMDb. And of course he was nominated at the Oscars. And I mean, just look at his fellow nominees. They're so weird that it's clear there was no attempt to wrestle this thing out of Ledger's hands. Seriously, Josh Brolin for Milk instead of the much more obvious Oscar baity performance from James Franco, breaking their 43-year streak of not nominating blackface performances instead of acknowledging Brad Pitt's career best performance, nominating Michael Shannon for Revolutionary Road instead of just ignoring the existence of Revolutionary Road. They weren't even trying. But it wasn't all about Heath Ledger. I mean, yes, deep down the whole thing was about Heath Ledger, but ostensibly this campaign was about awarding the film as a whole, and the ultimate prize is Best Picture. But once the summer of Batman ends, the quote-unquote real Oscar movies come out to play. And that 2008 season was a gauntlet of meh. We can narrow it down to 10 movies, including The Dark Knight, that realistically could have gotten a Best Picture nomination, and remember, the Academy has to pick 5. These 7 all kind of fit the typical mold of a Best Picture nominee, but also any of them could be snubbed and no one would even notice. Then you've got Slumdog Millionaire, the only one people were certain would get nominated, which is enough to make it the frontrunner in such a weak field. And rounding out the pack is Wall-E, which is a special case. In previous years, the Oscars had been flirting with a Pixar movie in Best Picture, but they just wouldn't commit. Pixar had racked up nominations for every single feature they'd released since Toy Story, usually for writing, music, and once it was implemented, Best Animated Feature. Many wondered why 2007's Ratatouille, with its 5 nominations, wasn't contending for Best Picture. And then a year later, Wall-E was getting even better reviews. Like superhero movies, animated films almost never get nominated for Best Picture. I made a whole video on this, check it out. But at this point in time, they at least had 1. Superhero movies had 0. Would all that change when nominations were announced? Well, January 2009 comes around and the nominees are super boring. Slumdog gets in, of course, and the rest are Benjamin Button, Frost Nixon, Milk, and The Reader. No Wall-E, no Dark Knight. And to add insult to injury, the Best Director nominees are just the directors of the Best Picture nominees, meaning Christopher Nolan is out too. Not even an adapted screenplay nod. And that's where the tidal wave of outrage began. And it wasn't just angry film bros, mainstream publications were joining in too. Forbes said, "Oscar snubs the masses." The Guardian called it a disgrace. This was the kind of backlash the Academy hadn't seen since that other Heath Ledger movie got snubbed. It made them look incredibly out of touch. To make matters worse, their previous ceremony had the lowest viewership in Oscar history. So they can see impending doom when the most popular film in the past decade is absent from the biggest categories. They tried to recover with some weird, desperate ratings plays. During the ceremony, they debut an original Judd Apatow short film where James Franco and Seth Rogen riff on the Oscars or something.
Look, it's Janusz Kaminski, the cinematographer from Saving Private Ryan.
It made me do it, Mr. Spielberg.
They have Hugh Jackman performing an exhausting musical number every 15 minutes.
I'm saying it's all right to be gay. I'm Harvey Milk, the one that I want. How do you solve a problem like Maria? The musical is back!
And Best Supporting Actor, the award everyone is tuning in to see, and typically the first category announced, is delayed to over an hour into the broadcast. You know, so people don't turn off the TV immediately and miss the Judd Apatow short. Unsurprisingly, none of these resulted in a massive wave of apologies from Dark Knight fans. So the Academy decided it was time to make changes to prevent this kind of thing from happening again. They had to find a way to get their film industry country club to acknowledge movies that people actually watch. The simple solution would have been to stop clocking up Best Picture with stuff like Scent of a Woman or The Reader or Chocolat. Sinfully delicious. But let's be real, that's never gonna stop. So out of nowhere, after a unanimous vote from their Board of Governors, the Academy announced they were doubling the number of nominees, specifically citing The Dark Knight in their press release. And that changed the Oscars forever. Because suddenly, the most valuable and prestigious category just became way more accessible. Does this mean that the nomination itself is less valuable? Maybe. Was it a cynical ploy to combat criticism and boost ratings? Sure it was. But man, did it shake things up. The 82nd Academy Awards were the first of the expansion era, and the variety in Best Picture is staggering. You've got your handful of indie dramas, you've got your studio crowd pleasers, you've got the obligatory George Clooney nominee, and then it gets weird. District 9 was this mid-budget, found-footage South African sci-fi film that came out of nowhere with a viral marketing campaign to become a huge hit. Up was finally Pixar's first Best Picture nominee and the second ever animated film in that category. A Serious Man was a Coen Brothers film that everyone just kind of forgot about because they just won Best Picture 2 years prior, and everyone assumed that voter fatigue would keep them out entirely. And then somehow, despite no one predicting or wanting it to get the nomination, The Blind Side filled in the 10th slot. What a wild debut for the expansion era. Much more exciting than the boring lineup of the previous year. They did it again the next year, and once again we've got this great variety of films, including indies that would have never gotten in before. But there was a slight dip in ratings, so the Academy blamed the Best Picture expansion and reduced it to a sliding scale system, which ensures 5 to 10 nominees depending on a voting algorithm. The Hollywood Reporter called expansion a failure, and the sliding scale system became the new norm. In practice, it meant 8 or 9 Best Picture nominees every year. And that kind of fixed things. Barring a few notable exceptions, Best Picture expansion has been largely successful at what it sets out to do, widening the scope of what a Best Picture nominee looks like, including the winners. You got a bunch more indies, you had genre films, you had comedies regularly getting nominated, and of course you finally had a superhero movie. Even Christopher Nolan ended up okay. The Academy, always happy to give out apology nominations, ended up showering Inception with love. In fact, every Nolan film since The Dark Knight has won at least one Oscar, except for The Dark Knight Rises, ironically. The Academy announced they'll be ditching the sliding scale for a firm 10 nominees starting in 2022, partially because the films in contention have been so good that something deserving always gets snubbed now, but it's pretty wild that a blockbuster superhero movie could have such a lasting effect on Best Picture. It's just a shame they'll have to reduce it back to 5 in 2024 so they don't have to nominate Daddy's Home 3. Thanks for watching.